Hello, everybody out there in this wild virtual thing that we call life. I am the first bookstore. We are one of a few remaining feminist bookstores in the country that is fully owned and operated by women, which we are incredibly proud of. So thank you all so much for deciding to be with us tonight and sharing some of your time with us. We want to welcome you all to this the same way we would in our store, which is by acknowledging the land that we live in. So while some land was purchased after 2.5 years of open warfare on the Pan-Indian movement to keep colonizers out of the Great Lakes, and then another purchase happened around 1835 when natives were pushed west, known in colonizers' history as the Trail of Tears. All land was violently taken. So our bookstore stands on occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria, the Potawatomi, and the Miami people. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgement and about the rightful owner of the land where you are viewing tonight's event at native-land.ca. Additionally, beyond land acknowledgement, you can find yourself supporting your local land back initiatives and grassroots native movements. If you're in the Chicagoland area, American Indian Center Chicago is a great place to start. We will share the link to their site as well in the chat, so thank you all so much. If you haven't already purchased tonight's book, The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, you can do so by ordering online at womenandchildrenfirst.com. We can ship to anywhere in the continental U.S. You can also purchase your book by coming into the store Tuesday through Sundays, or 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., or via curbside pickup, because we do still have that as an option, as we are trying to respect everyone's setup in this jiggy jungle, okay? Our website also provides a calendar of our upcoming events. One that is getting much buzz already is our tomorrow event with Chandler Baker and Sam Irby, authors of The Husbands and Wow, No Thank You, respectively. So feel free to check that out. Now, as for our event tonight, we are uber excited to have author, excuse me, I need a little bit of water. Getting used to life without masks. Tonight we have author Felicia Rose Chavez and Eileen Favorite. I'll introduce them and then I'll turn the floor over to them. At any point during the conversation, please feel free to ask your questions. You can just use that Ask a Question button, which is at the bottom of your screen. And you can use that throughout the entire talk, as we will have a Q&A session at the end. So, the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop. As an educator, I was excited to have a book that debuted during the pandemic that touched the lives of myself and my colleagues. I have turned plum in the face, having argument after argument with administrators and standardized data folks who increasingly push assimilation through education onto little bodies of color, all in the name of success for students. I'm happy that this book not only sets as truth that our notions of good or success are inherently oppressive and white supremacist, but that those very notions are counterintuitive to the world that we swear we want to build humanities. In a world where everyone is seemingly wrestling with abolitionist practices, the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop provides concrete solutions to get us going in education and the arts. And I'm so thankful for your piece of work, Felicia. So thank you so much for having the courage to share this with us, okay? So I'm excited to kick off tonight. So our guest tonight, the author of our lovely book, Felicia Rose Chavez, is an award-winning educator with an MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of Iowa. She is author of The Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, How to Decolonize the Creative Classroom, and co-editor of the Breakbeat Poets, Volume 4, Latinx, with Willy Perdomo and Jose Olivares. Felicia's teaching career includes the University of New Mexico, where she was distinguished as the most innovative instructor of the year, the University of Iowa, where she was distinguished as the Outstanding Instructor of the Year, and Colorado College, where she received the Theodore Roosevelt Collins Outstanding Faculty Award. Originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico, she currently serves as Creativity and Innovation Scholar in Residence at Colorado College. For more information about the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop and to access and add to a multi-genre compilation of contemporary writers of color, please visit www.antiracistworkshop.com. Eileen Favorite received a 2021 Illinois Art Council Award for nonfiction. Her essay on aerial views was named a notable essay in the Best American Essays 2020 and won first place in the 2019 Midwest Review's Great Midwest Writing Contest. Her first novel, The Heroines, was named a Best Debut Novel by the Rocky Mountains News and has been translated into Finnish, Italian, Russian, Czech, and Korean. The audio version was nominated for Best Recording by the American Library Association. A writer of both poetry and prose, she's twice received Illinois Art Council Artist Fellowship. Her work has appeared in many publications, including Essay Daily, Fiction Southeast, the Chicago Tribune, Tri-Quarterly, The Rumpus, The Toast, Chicago Reader, Poetry East, and Diagram. She's been nominated for a Pushcart Prize for both fiction and nonfiction. She teaches at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where she received her MFA in writing, and at Graham School of Continuing Studies at the University of Chicago. She lives in Chicago with her husband and 2 daughters. So now that you know a little bit about our 2 authors and our 2 panelists for tonight, I will let you all have it, the good stuff. Felicia Rose Chavez and Eileen Favorite and the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop. Enjoy, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raven.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So happy to get started. Is the sound okay?
Yeah, I love that I'm rocking my 9-year-old's headphones. I was like, oh no, I need something. That was fabulous. That was a fantastic introduction. And I just really appreciate when it's like from the heart, you know, like people are using this work and have long been part of this movement, and it shows, you can hear it, and it makes me feel really, really good. So thank you for that introduction.
That's fantastic. Okay, so I asked Felicia to read a little bit from the beginning of her book. And are you all getting an echo? No, I think it's okay. And she's going to kick it off. I asked her to sort of center the reading around her experience as a student, because I think that as educators, our experiences as students really make us the kind of educators we want to be, often from having the kind of educators who maybe wound us or damage us. So,
yeah, someone once said educational trauma, and I've since picked that up and I've used that. I think it's important to sit in that educational trauma, reflect on it, you know, give ourselves over to it for a moment and then move forward. So I'm going to read from the introduction of the book, largely centering on my time as a graduate student, and then my early years teaching at Colorado College. In graduate school at the University of Iowa's nonfiction writing workshop, I was what you might call a difficult student. I own that. Black hoodie, black boots, black coat, slumped and down at the classroom desk, alert and vocal and pissed off, alienated and isolated and deeply lonely and cold. I remember icicles daggering the air, a cold so bad my toilet water froze. How quaint, many said about Iowa City, liberal, walkable, cheap, a real writer's paradise. But I got long stares at the co-op grocery that said, you don't belong here. I was a brown-skinned Chicana conspicuous in my white picket rental. And when I'd complain about the Iowans who asked me to see them to a fitting room, to refill their water, to point them to a restroom, I don't Work here, I'd repeat through gritted teeth. My family would tell me to hold my tongue and focus on the writing. I was, after all, lucky to be in the workshop. Thus, the implicit imperative for people of color in MFA programs to write, but not to exercise voice. Silencing writers is central to the traditional writing workshop model. The matrix of silence is so profound, it enlists writers of color to eradicate ourselves. Even now, as I type this, my heart tells me, no, you can't say that. You might derail your teaching career, shrink your literary network, hurt their feelings, sound ungrateful, blow things out of proportion. Even though I am the commander of my own experience, my heart tells me to choose subservience out of fear that my narrative might ricochet off of institutionalized white power and smack me upside the head. That's how racism works, right? It's systematic oppression that breeds behavioral norms. Because when the flowering trees bloomed pink, Iowa City was charming. I had friends, a select few brilliant women who dragged me on walks when I'd rather brood, who fed me vegetables when I'd rather binge, who discussed global politics when I lacked perspective. I had earnest students who were unafraid of risk and a champion thesis advisor who saved me a seat at her family's dinner table. But this book is not about individuals. This book is about institutions. More specifically, institutional racism, the system of advantage based on race. When I speak of the traditional writing workshop model, I speak of an institution of dominance and control upheld by primarily white workshop leaders, majority white workshop participants, and canonical white authors memorialized in hefty anthologies, the required texts of study. And when I speak of dominance and control, I'm really talking about silence. I'm not just referring to the traditional workshop ritual of silencing the author when critiquing their work. Building tough skin, they call it, to better prepare for the real world, as though writers of color live anywhere else, as though our skin is not leathered to the touch. But a profound, ubiquitous silence, the nearly complete omission of writers of color in person and print. It is as though we do not exist. This was true when I was a financially independent first-generation undergraduate student. This was true when I was a graduate fellowship student, and it's true now that I'm a visiting assistant professor of English at a private liberal arts college. It's like writing programs are encased in shutterproof glass, museum relics safeguarding whiteness as the essence of literary integrity. In 2018, I was one of the only people of color in my English department, and that made me feel physically, emotionally, and intellectually at risk for harm. Compound race and gender with my working class background, and presto, instant and incessant anxiety catapulting me back in time to when I was a graduate student. Anxiety when the editor of the literary journal asks me to step down as a volunteer reader because I express concern that her all-white staff might result in aesthetic bias. Anxiety when a white female professor uses a black pen to cross out references to ethnicity in my personal essay, noting in the margins, "You don't need to make it a race thing." Anxiety when a white male professor, former teacher of the year, keeps me after class to discuss my repeated requests for more inclusive reading list. He sits inappropriately close, sarcastically mocking how unfair it is, how unfair that I'm not represented in the syllabus. He yells so loud that a concerned colleague knocks on the classroom door. Anxiety when a white male professor, whom I intend to claim as mentor, begins class with a vote. One of the faculty members insists that we hire a person of color for the Visiting Writers series. Would you prefer that we bring in a person of color or a quality writer, someone who's doing really exciting things? He suggests that we go around the room, one by one, and voice our vote aloud. I'm the only person of color present, planted at the tail end of the circle, and so I witnessed 12 or so of my white peers, esteemed journalists and rhetoric instructors alike, play into the false binary. No, no people of color. We want quality writers only. My whole body shakes like I'm cold, but I'm not cold. I'm hot. My face must be so red, I remember thinking. Can't they see my face? But of course they don't see me. That's the point. When it's my turn to vote, I stand up, shaking, hot, my legs disobedient anchors, and exit the room. I don't say a word. I save it for when the garage door shuts behind me at home. Why didn't you say anything? I sometimes ask myself. To speak up was to enact my powerlessness, isolating me from my classmates who would go on to befriend one another, marry one another, hire one another later in their careers. To speak up was to square off with my professor, the white person in power, the very man who had attracted me to Iowa, whose favor I courted. The implications, the outcomes of moments like these can last a lifetime. Days later, this professor will invite me out for coffee. I'll recount my discomfort in defense of my early exit. I hardly think I said it like that, he'll reply, rolling his eyes, and an instant trifecta of thoughts will dash the line. One, that I'm just another overexcited brown person, embarrassing myself with wild stories because, come on, it wasn't that bad. Can't you just let it go? Two, that it always comes down to words for us writers. There's power there, and we know it. And three, that he's just another calculating white person attempting to manipulate my narrative to better reflect on him. One after another, my professors will reach out in an attempt to manage the situation being me, of course, and not insatiable white supremacy. In class, my peers are starry-eyed, but all have X-ray glasses that expose my professor's bias. Whenever we interact, I'll feel anxious and resentful and vulnerable and regretful too that I can't just be cool. Oh, to drop out of school, that everlasting gobstopper of a fantasy I lodged in my mouth day and night for 3 years of graduate study. But loyal to my family's wishes, I held my tongue, or at least the Chicana version of holding my tongue, which was to make a big fuss trying to change the workshop from within. Together with a trusted friend from my cohort, I formed a student diversity committee. I served as the elected student liaison to faculty. I petitioned for the emergency hire of a professor of color, and I co-founded Toward a New Canon, an elective class that featured contemporary writers of color. I channeled my anger into action, and still a white peer called me militant. Another white peer called me radical, and another suggested over coffee that I toe the line until graduation because everyone's already stressed out enough. Here I thought I was a step closer to belonging, if not at the co-op grocery, then at least within my own cohort. But no, the backlash was just as hostile as the censorship. Even white allies warned me to tone it down, fearful that my activism was annihilating my professional network. I was losing the game of graduate school. Move on, they said, but I wouldn't, and I couldn't. Move where? I wanted to ask. I live in this skin. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry.
Go.
There.
So it's funny that you chose that piece because there's a quote in there that I loved, which was, "The outcomes of moments like these can last a lifetime." And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how powerful this harm can be. You know, earlier in the book, you talk about the harm of something that happened in 3rd grade. When you were like, this teacher's wrong. So, you know, I sort of said, let's talk about Iowa because I know the writers in the audience are going to be like, oh my God, she's overthrowing the Iowa model. This is amazing. But really, this is a lifetime experience of racism. And I wondered what you would give, what advice you would give to students who find themselves in these oppressive situations.
Sure. I mean, it's daunting. There's a lot of fear involved, right? In situations like the one I just recounted, because, as you pointed out, that specific quote, the implications can last a lifetime. I mean, here's a professional opportunity. You feel a certain amount of gratitude, and are like literally in debt often to these institutions for the opportunity just to be there. You've got a cohort in which you're relying on to create community, to build art together, to go on to become movement makers, right, in the industry. And I see it all the time. I see social media posts and connections that are happening from folks that I went to school with, that they built those bridges, they built those relationships during that time there, right? So to speak up, to be the quote unquote problem, right? To be the one where everyone sighs and, oh, here comes Felicia, right? Now everything's going to get serious, or we're going to have to talk about, race or class. It's hard to take on. It's hard. It takes courage. And I speak to students. I have a workshop that I do with undergraduate and graduate students, sometimes even high school students, called Self-Advocacy. And it's about really standing up for ourselves to choose, to be our own best readers first and foremost, right? To tune inward and really listen to our work and strategies for how to identify what we like about what we're producing, or the vision that we have for the work, and how to protect that. And then in the service of protecting the work in a formal workshop environment, how to self-advocate within that kind of public arena, right? Being able to guide and moderate a conversation, even if we're not, quote unquote, allowed to, even if it's against the rules. No one's given us permission. I say, take that, because it is your work. And so strategies for how to advocate for the work on the page. And then beyond that, strategies for how to self-advocate in conversations with authority or seeming to be authority mentors, whether it be a peer who's misunderstanding our work, a professor or a writing mentor who feels like we feel like we're in a power hierarchy, within that particular relationship, and even further with an agent, a publisher, editor, and publicist. So all strategies for how to overcome fear and self-advocate by really being our own readers, recognizing our audiences, audiences, and accepting and embracing that that's a beautiful thing and that's worth fighting for.
It's great, because I think your model, as I've used it now in my own courses, where I'm allowing the writer to lead the discussion, right? Mm-hmm. And to write the questions that they want answered. And so your model really gives that space to students to own their voice and to not be silenced. And so I think it's just amazingly liberating in your philosophy of sort of decentering the professor, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And giving that power to the student. And so all of us who adapt your model will be trying to give that to our students, of course. But then there is, the fact that the students have to sort of learn how to do it for themselves as well. So yes, I think you were incredibly bold. You're upending the Iowa model, so this took a crazy courage, right? And I thought one of the things that is really interesting is another faculty moment when someone said, oh, we can't get these students to write their theses. And you said, well, I just kind of asked them how they're doing, right? And the other man says, oh, we can't mother them.
Mm-hmm.
And I also encountered that sort of male pushback about mothering or coddling students. And would you talk a little bit about your journey as a mother and a teacher and how you create a space that I think is a very feminine space?
I mean, for me, the interpretation of feminine, there's like so much. It's in terms of the interpretation of even the word mother. That was a grueling experience for me. The transition from myself as an independent contractor to myself as mother was one of the toughest transitions in my life, because I had to really learn how to serve. I had to really learn how to be second to someone else. And as much as I want to own that up front, like that just came naturally to me, right? I hear so many stories about the love hormone that overflowed. Like, it wasn't that way for me. I had so much to learn, and how to separate my own wants and needs from someone else's wants and needs, that I didn't always dominate, that I had to step back and really listen deeply to someone else and what they wanted first, and then adjust accordingly. And in the process, I think it transformed my relationship in the classroom, because I think the status quo is that we dominate, we are the authority, that we're talking and everyone else is listening, right? But what happens when we flip that? How can we better serve our students as that second self, right? How can we say, I'm going to stop talking in this moment and just listen to what you have to say, where you're from, who you love, what you want to write, right? What vision you have that you haven't quite captured yet, without me telling you how to change, right? I'm going to listen and then just support you and champion you, be your ally in your own journey. And so, there's nothing easy about that. I talked with I was dying as you were saying that you're adopting some of this model, to just say, how's it going? Because I did talk to a workshop leader who, had just wrapped her attempt at this kind of model. And she sighed afterwards. She said, that was exhausting. I was like, it is hard. It is hard work to tamper down everything, that the impulse to control, to dominate, to manipulate, to guide, all of the, those words sound ugly, but it truly is the status quo of teaching. And when we flip that, it is difficult. Just as learning to mother for me was incredibly difficult.
Well, I have to say that your model has actually lifted a weight off of me, because I felt that to be a good teacher was to edit the heck out of stuff and really tell my students what to do to make their work better. And I feel like I've been given a break with your model, which says, let them guide it. Don't cross out and edit. And I think it's been going really well with my students. Actually.
Excellent. Okay.
It's been going. I'll also just say I have a whole slideshow. I do a PowerPoint of, this is how we're going to do a workshop, right? It's the anti-racist writing workshop, artist statements, asking questions. And I had a man say to me, a white man, Eileen, I was very nervous. There were a lot of rules, but in the end, this went really well. And I listened to your interview with Kiese layman, and he talked about this idea of rules and how, I find your model to be incredibly open, and at the same time, you have some very definite ideas on how things should go. And how did you come to all that?
It's like anything, right? An experiment. I just spoke with a professor this morning, and we were talking about that her class was an experiment. It was an attempt. And I love that. I think that's the best place to be in when you're shaping a learning opportunity together, right? And a community together, is that you're taking a bit of risk and you're asking your students to take some risk. So for me, it was I consider that scaffolding, not rules, but scaffolding that I've kind of observed over time. I tell folks, when you adopt it, like, it's just an offering. Like I call this book a memoir. It's truly my lived life experience. It's my passion, my love, right? And so I'm kind of like holding it out. Like, this is what I've learned. What have you learned? Like, let's have an exchange. Let's have a dialogue about ways to get better. And I've learned from so many readers who have reached out. Like, I've learned so many different strategies for my own classroom. So I think that, what I'm putting out into the world is the scaffolding that I've observed over time that works best. I didn't do it right the first time. I didn't do it right the second time. I didn't do it right the third time. And each time I'm tweaking, like maybe this, maybe this. Each time it was an experiment and a risk. And I felt comfortable to do that because I knew what I was working toward. I knew what I wanted for my students. And I expressed that to them, like, yeah, what do you think, guys? That really didn't go well, right? And they would talk to me about it. It wasn't something that I had to front like I have all the answers, like I'm the expert in the room, and so for me that's the scaffolding that works best, that sets students up for success, because that's the goal, right? Each and every time, is that you're never putting something forward that they're not going to rise to, they're not going to reach. It may seem daunting or challenging, but that's where the excitement lies, afterward, when they do satisfy that sort of scaffolding, when they adhere to it, like you said, your student is like, yeah, that went pretty well, right? Instead, I have students who say, I would never call myself a writer, and now I think I'm a writer, right? I think I'm going to ditch microbiology, like, take this creative writing class. And it's so exciting to just provide for their confidence through just a set of rules that help provide a baseline, so that within that baseline they can roam free and choose what they are interested in doing, and what they're interested in reading, and what they're interested in producing.
So would you say that the traditional model of workshop leader as expert and this kind of domination of students, and this idea that, especially in workshop, like, you have to learn to get tough, you have to kind of suffer. I mean, do you consider that a white supremacist model?
It's very masculine, to be sure, right? It's got a cutthroat quality to it. Like, I call it the Colosseum mentality of, like, bloodshed, like, rip it apart. I want you to be brutal. I can take it. That means nothing to me. Like, I don't understand why we're putting creativity and creation within that context. And so that's not my intention when I sit down to, like, ally with a student, to mentor a student. I think that absolutely it's grounded in we talk about decolonizing the classroom. We're decolonizing that mentality that we need to rip something,
tear it down and rebuild
beautiful.
it.
Yeah, that we need to rip it and destroy it in order to grow it. Well,
it actually is a model of colonization, isn't it? that's what colonizers did. They went into other territories and ripped out what they wanted and dusted off what they didn't. And it's just amazing to link these ideas, right? These ideas of, the larger culture kind of trickling down into higher ed and trickling down into every single classroom because of this dominant model of society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So another thing I noticed in the book was, I think it's really fun the way you set up your classroom. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you run a class? Silly putty, music, snack, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it changes class by class, but I think there's some community opportunities, community building opportunities at the get-go, right? So we've got an arts community gathering together. I think it's important to have food. I just do. I love food, but also I think that if I'm thinking about, and I talk about this in some of these professional development trainings, but if we're really thinking about like our macro goals for student learning, right? When we're really thinking about what we want students to leave with, it's not how to write a thesis statement. It's not how to write a sonnet, right? And if it is, let's grow that. Let's break that open, right? So if it's about curiosity, right? And that's one of our macro learning goals. Well, there's so much that food offers us in community, right? We've got students offering one another something from their own homes, from their own traditions, right? Whether it just be a box of cereal that they grew up loving and they love it. And so they put out like a box of cereal and a gallon of milk and we go at it, or a bread that someone's baked and they bring that in together, right? So it's more than just feed the students, but also this sort of workshopping is an exercise in endurance. And so we need that. We need that fuel to be together and to be able to focus mentally and even like spiritually, right? To be able to just give to one another and really receive one another's words. So we eat, right? We listen to music. So they'll walk in, I'll have music playing for the first few days. And then it's during that time where everyone's kind of settling in to their seats in the classroom and kind of trickling in, or on Zoom, kind of logging in. And there's always that lag there where folks are logging in. So I'll have music playing and then they're like, your music's not any good. And I'm like, I know my music's not any good. So what are you listening to, right? When they walk in with the earbuds. So plug that in, let us listen to it. So everyone takes a day, we listen to music, and that's another gesture of community. I'll sometimes have, especially when we're doing like presentations, right? Or workshopping and sharing work, there's something to touch. Linda Berry has a great exercise where she's, having students draw spirals, right, as they're listening to one another's work. I like to have silly putty, and they're moving their fingers, they're focusing, they're fully present in their bodies. So if you think about it, right, this is a fully embodied experience. We've got the senses, we've got touch, we've got sound, right, we've got taste, and we've got our own bodies fully present. We're doing check-in. I'm asking every single person by name how they're doing to start the day. They come to expect that ritual. They come to expect to hear their name aloud. And in turn, they come to expect to address one another by their names and pronounce them correctly because they've heard it so often, and to share and give of themselves in this vulnerable space. So that's kind of the tone if you were to step right in.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about mindfulness really in the classroom. And I hadn't really linked mindfulness and an anti-racist agenda, but I think that there's something about that, right? And this idea of not being on autopilot, not responding in ways that you typically do to situations. So yeah, do you see mindfulness as being, part of creativity and part of being an anti-racist?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's so many people of color that can testify to the fact that microaggressions are a minute by minute kind of lived reality. Bodies speak so loudly, even when they're not saying a word. So I've been sensitive to that my entire life. We read one another, right? We read one another's bodies. And so a mission of mindfulness, you know, at the start of this practice was that I wanted students to not feel entitled to shut one another down with their bodies, even if they're not saying anything about each other's work. There's so often that a student can slump and sigh and roll their eyes and tap their fingers. And these are all ways of communicating to one another, you know, the worthlessness of the work that they're hearing. And it really does serve to shut us down. And so I wanted to address that immediately as part of an anti-racist agenda. A personal sense of mindfulness is checking in with ourselves and saying, how can I best commit to this writing practice, right? If I want to really try this, if I want to be a true member of this arts collective, how can I step back and best serve myself, right? Because so much of what I do is to please the professor, to please my fellow workshop participants, to live in a place of fear and procrastinate to the very last minute and then pound something out and present it, right? These are all habits. And so how do we become more mindful about the habits that we've established, often rooted in fear, so that we can be our most authentic selves and give our best when it comes to our writing practice.
Right. And I think if we as professors are also mindful, then we're more open to being corrected by our students, right?
Absolutely.
Because they have so much to teach us about the world they want, right? And so I think it's really interesting to link that, the way you link the body and the mind to creativity, I really admire. And I want to say this, I asked you to open with sort of like your horror stories from only because I so admire your ability to turn that around and create this work, this antidote to that. And, I thank you for that, because, it's really an act of the imagination to resist and to rebel. And you put your creativity to work at this, right? It's not solely intellectual. Do you see resistance as creative?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that we do it daily. I think that I do it daily. I see my husband as a Black man doing it daily. Like, it's something that we don't even know is a superpower that we have, that we are so practiced at. I had to, in this book, stop and understand that what I'm asking readers to do is to look backward and say, okay, how was I taught? What practices am I continuing to replicate today? And then pivot and say, what can I change, right? And I had to do the same. I had to look back, say, how was I taught? What did I endure, right? How can I change within the classroom? What am I doing to move my own practice forward and to really, truly cultivate a community of citizens, not just writers, but citizens, right? And so that was my aim in these memoir sections, of really looking deep, and they were very hard and very emotional to write.
Right. And we're going to move to the questions now, but I do also want to say that was one thing I loved about the book, was the personal essay aspect and how you wove your pedagogy in with your personal experiences and your willingness to be vulnerable and tell us you were angry and
often.
ran. What's the essence of the memoir, right? The self-indictment. but that ability is also what makes one able to shift out of their racist biases. So you're sort of modeling that at the same time by, showing us who you really are. So thank you for that. All right, I'm going to read this question.
Okay,
Margot says, reading your book was a beautiful, emotional experience for me. I work at a shelter here in Chicago, teaching elementary age students who are experiencing homelessness. There isn't a promise of linear progression, start to middle to end, of a workshop over a semester as students are moving in and out of shelter. Do you have advice on adapting your model to a transient classroom and or advice on encouraging young K through 5 BIPOC writers?
What work, right?
Wow.
That's so sad. I've been carrying that. This is just, the sadness on sadness on sadness is like, I feel like we're all carrying this on our backs right now. It's a hard time. This is heartbreaking to hear, but also such an opportunity, right? And so I think if I look at the structure of the workshops that I teach, I would say about a third of it is about confidence building and community, really turning inward. And the next third is thinking about genre through the lens of craft, right? How can we learn the craft concepts and collectively define them, so that no matter what genre we're attempting to teach, we can apply this tool set. And then later this formal workshop, that's the final third, and revision, right? And reflection. I would focus on that first third, right? That confidence building, that sense of you have something to say, and addressing a relationship with reading and writing, right? First looking back, as always, as we've repeated throughout this conversation, of like, what is your relationship with reading? What is your relationship to writing, right? And what do you want to try? What are you afraid of when you sit down to work? And that mantra of, but I'll do it anyway, right? And so really going inward with the hope that, why are you good at writing? That's one of my favorite things to ask young people, right? Because they have such pure answers, right? But really going inward and having them do that sort of personal free writing, because it allows an opportunity for them to listen to their own voice. And that's what I want all of our young people to do over and over again, is to go inward and seek out themselves as authority, right? To start trusting that voice inside of them, to listen to their own ideas for a piece or a project, without us saying, okay, fill in the blank, here's Robert Frost, right? Robert Frost. And then also just, who do you love? Who are you into? What are you watching? What are you listening to? What have you observed lately? The alleyway graffiti. Let's go study that as fine art, right? Like what can we learn from what you love? So that would be my particular starting place for younger folks.
That's great. Okay, here's another question. How do you respond to students who want you to follow the traditional model because you're the teacher, you know better, or even worse, they want to get their money's worth? And a student-led classroom makes them think the work is being put on them rather than on you, where it belongs.
Yeah, I think that the misconception is that I'm not doing a lot. This doesn't mean that I'm not working, but I'm serving as ally, which is different than serving as authority, right? So this is the most common pushback, especially for some adult writers who are paying for like a low residency kind of opportunity, right? They want to be coached. They want to be heavily line edited, and they want to move forward with something that they can sell. And so what I tell instructors is that we absolutely need to learn our student community. This anti-racist action is about adaptation. There's no model. I've had folks ask me, like, there's a Lucy Calkins workshop model, let's take that model and let's build a package and sell it to schools across it. But that's not what it is. There's no one way. So how can you best learn the students that you're working with, right? And if this is the predominant kind of conversation, then what do we choose? Because teaching is all about choices. So what is the choice that we make to push this anti-racist agenda through this workshop environment so that we all leave with something that will make us better people in terms of citizens moving forward, right? And so sometimes for students who want more guidance, I will ask them to write that at the top of their page, right? I don't assume that every student is the same. Some may be louder at complaining than others, right? But if someone comes and says, I have I want to submit this to this magazine, right? I'm going to write that at the top because I need you to play a certain role for me right now as my writing mentor. I'm happy to take on that role, but I'm not going to assume that everyone's turning this over to the Kenyon Review tomorrow, right? Some people are just experimenting. Some people are just touching on something that's highly emotional for them and they feel very vulnerable about that. So that's the artist statement, is that I allow them to have opportunity to express that, but I can adapt and adjust to my students' wants and needs, but they need to self-advocate, right? They need to communicate that with me so that they're not just dissatisfied in the end. That's so passive to be dissatisfied, right? If they're dissatisfied with the workshop feedback, I'll ask them, well, what questions did you ask to guide conversation? And did you push the group to give you more satisfactory responses, right? And a lot of times it was like, well, no, right? And so it's really teaching them how to communicate, how to be their own authority. And I think that that's a lifelong lesson and a skill worth building, whether they know it or not in that particular moment.
Right. And I think that what is implied in what you're talking about, Felicia, is that you have these pre-workshop meetings with students and then post-workshop meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing it's in that post-workshop moment that you say, well, you didn't get what you wanted. Did you ask for it? Am I right?
I think at the very beginning of this practice, yes, I would have one or two students who felt really dissatisfied with the feedback that they received. Later on, as I built that scaffolding, right, I built in a section on how to ask really good questions. And I built in a kind of screening of the questions that they were preparing to ask in that pre-workshop kind of conversation. So there were multiple opportunities to touch base on the quality of the questions, so that, again, best setting them up for success. So when they entered into workshop, they hit the ground running and they were able to get the feedback that they wanted.
Good. I think that question in your response is perfect, because basically your philosophy remains the same. This has to be student driven. It has to be the students advocating for themselves. And it takes the onus actually off of us as professors in the room to impose our aesthetic, right? And that's a little bit, I'd love for you to talk a little bit in the minute we have left about, well, one of the things that you really go against is that, imitate the famous writer exercise. I was so happy when I saw that, because I always hated that. It just felt like a setup not to succeed. And that's part of the finding your voice in that moment, right? No, there was a question in there and I just lost it.
Well, the assumption there is that we share this collective love of these canonical figures, and that's just so limiting to me. There's a reason why our young people don't like to read. It's because they don't like what they're assigned to read. When we ask them what they're into, then we have an opportunity to truly ask that follow-up question: how can you extend that legacy? Which is essentially what we're asking when we say, read Hemingway, imitate Hemingway, extend that legacy, right? But not everybody loves Hemingway, for crying out loud. So when we invite our students into the room, they're writing legacies into the room, right? They're mentors. Not only do we learn, but we grow this thing called passion, and we share in it, but we're all not imitating, what each other's doing. Again, it's all about that kind of personal vision for the work.
Okay, so we are at 6:58. Any last comments that you want to? Thank you. I want to thank you, Felicia, for speaking with me and for your wonderful book.
Yeah, thank you. I hope this is always such a tough time, and I hear myself talking, and I hope that there were points in there that we could take and grow from. I always encourage listeners, and I wish I could see you all. I can't see folks, but to use that website address that's at the end of my bio. There's a contact button on that website to reach out, to ask questions. I'm doing consultations right now, like one-on-one consultations, which have been really exciting and fun for me, and to access that resource list. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Raven? Thank you all for coming. Such a great turnout.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Again, if you haven't yet purchased the book, the buy the book button is still very much so active. So you can still hit that book and you can either pick it up in stores or have us ship it to you. Please do purchase the book. It is really a really great resource and tool to have. Even if you're not in education, I think it's great at getting your brain percolating on how you can problem solve around anti-racism across fields. So it's just a great resource. Thank you so much, Felicia and Eileen, for being with us tonight and for being so generous and sharing some of your time with us. I hope that you all stay safe during this world that we're enduring right now. I hope everyone at home finds safety and some type of joy and rest. Happy weekend. Have a great Friday, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.